That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Skinwalker, the directorial debut of Christian Neuman, which premiered at the 2019 Cairo International Film Festival and will be available to stream August 4th, 2020, courtesy of Cleopatra Entertainment. And it stars the inimitable Udo Kier.
Should I describe the movie?
Yes.
The story? Okay. So the film focuses on a young woman named Regine.
Mm-hmm.
So she comes home from work one day where her boyfriend tells her, hey, there's a guy here who says he's your brother. He wants to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, my brother's dead. I don't know who that is. But they go into the apartment. They speak with this guy. And the guy basically says, and I had to write it down because I thought it was funny how he said it. He said, your brother's not dead. I'm his father. He killed your grandmother. You need to come home.
Which is a little bit like that scene in The Room where he goes and buys flowers and like, hello, doggy, you're my favorite customer.
Yeah, bye-bye. It literally is like that quick. And just off of that, she's like, well, guess I got to go back home. So she lives somewhere in like Eastern Europe.
So it filmed in Belgium and Luxembourg. So I'm assuming, I don't know this for sure, that she's probably in Belgium and goes to Luxembourg, I'm guessing.
So she travels to visit her family home, which is a sort of stately manor, kind of in a rural-ish area.
In the country. Mm-hmm.
In the country. The only person living there now is her father, played by Udo Kier.
Claus.
So right away, weird things start happening. She's hallucinating, she's daydreaming, she's having nightmares, we're getting flashbacks. There's a lot going on. We also learn in the beginning, via flashback, that Regine was present while her mother was giving birth to her brother. Mm-hmm. And it's clear there's something wrong with the baby because the woman who's assisting with the delivery looks at the baby like she's terrified.
That's the grandmother.
Well, that's the grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
The grandmother runs out with the baby. So Regine explains that the baby was given up for adoption and died shortly thereafter. Mm-hmm. But the man who visited her in her apartment, who says the baby's not dead, your brother's not dead, he's claiming that he killed her grandmother. But so he said all these things, but then he keeps popping up asking Udo Kier, did you tell her the truth? Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, what else is there to know? So that's the big sort of like plot twist. Like, well, what more is there to know? We also find out that the mother is in a mental institution.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the big gag is that her brother is dead and Regine killed him. Mm-hmm. So when the little boy was born and like we see a flashback of her carrying the little deformed baby, she goes and throws him into the well, like an empty well, and kills him.
But there's a whole segment in the second act of the film where she finds Isaac, that's the brother's name, personified, living in a cave in the woods, who's this creature thing, is this golem-like creature with this high, tinny voice.
We'll get to that.
But then and we don't find out till the very end that he really is indeed dead, and all of our insights into Regine's mental state, she's just basically psychotic.
Yeah, and the trauma of her killing her brother, she's clearly blocked it, but has also manifested into like all of these hallucinations. It's a lot.
Which are also kind of triggered, I think we're led to believe, and some of this maybe seems to have been placed on the narrative in post-production, because when she's making out with her boy, it opens on this like neon lit club scene, and she goes home with this man who's her boyfriend, and he's whispering, I want you to have my baby. And that we're led to believe, I think that is part of the trigger.
The final hallucination is that she does have the baby, mm-hmm. right? Like that's one of her final hallucinations. Yeah. The film ends with her in a mental institution, not unlike her mother. Mm-hmm. The end. Okay, well then let me quickly go through my notes. My first note is the wig situation in this movie is not good. Because the flashback to Udo Kier, he's wearing a really bad wig that I think actually makes him look older than when we see him today. 20 some years later. Mm-hmm. And then the doctor who treated the other
Regine.
guy, well, Regine and the mother, right? Mm-hmm. His wig game's also kind of, it was distracting to me. My next note, why are they speaking English?
I think that's just marketability. That was.
I know, but it really took me out.
It doesn't also define where they are. So it's, again, one of those Eurocentric movies where everybody's speaking in heavily accented English, which makes some of the dialogue hard to hear without subtitles. But yeah, the people are from all over the place. Udo Kier, of course, is he was born in Cologne, I believe, and the grandmother is a Luxembourgian character actress that's been in a few things.
Like I said, the film packs a lot in there. So there are a lot of interesting scenes that kind of all... The first one is there's a scene... The film is beautifully shot, and there's a scene of her sitting at like the dinner table, and she has a row of like capsules that look like just generic pill capsules. And she's kind of like organizing them. I'm assuming they're her like psych meds. And she like shoves them into a jar of jelly and is playing with them. I thought that was a really interesting like scene and a cool shot, but then it has no purpose.
I think that's kind of my complaint with a lot of it, is that there are a lot of cool bits, but it never feels cohesive narratively. And not that I need it to, but something has to come together somewhere, because ultimately it's a lot of strange red herrings.
Yep. So the man who visits her and says, "I'm actually the dad of your brother, like I fathered this boy."
I sired this boy.
Yeah. When he convinces her, like, "I have proof. Come meet me at this place and I'll prove to you that your brother's alive and that he killed your grandmother." The only proof he has is like a bloody hammer.
With some hair on it.
With some hair on it. Which to me just seemed like, I mean, obviously this proves nothing. And really it just seemed like that character and his plotline just seems there's too much on it. Because ultimately it makes no sense. Okay. Like what you said about their accents, I usually don't complain about this, but with the hundreds of movies I've watched in the past year, this film, the sound was terrible.
It is, yeah.
The dialogue is recorded in such a way that it's very difficult to understand. It sounds muffled, and the music. There are several scenes where there's music playing, and the quality is just... It was really difficult to sit through.
Well, especially because there's like this Oktoberfest like local celebration.
That's the main scene I'm talking about. Yeah.
Where there's also like bits of dialogue happening amidst the celebration, which is blaring.
But even there are a few scenes where we see a character, I think it's Udo Kier mainly, talking at a distance, and it sounds like he was recorded at a distance. Very difficult. I didn't like that. Obviously, screeners don't have subtitles usually, so maybe with subtitles I wouldn't have been as annoyed. I thought the actor playing Regine...
So her name's Amber Anderson. She will be shortly seen in Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir Part 2.
I liked her. I like how she looks on screen. I think she's beautiful. She reminded me of Adrienne Curry, who was the season 1 winner of America's Next Top Model.
See, I was thinking of like a brunette version of Margot Robbie.
I could see that. Yeah, I liked her. I think she was doing her damnedest.
She was, I felt, because you were laughing at one point because she has a meltdown at her grandma's funeral. That's...
Oh my God.
That it's not exactly her fault, but it feels a little like Strangers with Candy, Jerry Blankish almost.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think that's Ms. Anderson's fault. I think that's the direction and the screenplay.
Beyond it just being... So to me this felt... So the film is beautifully shot. It feels like whoever made it knew what they were doing, and maybe they were just... Like they just did everything. Like every plot device, every camera angle, every type of shot, it just is all shoved in there.
Well, especially because it could have been kind of, based on the twists that do happen, it could have been kind of a cool narrative. And I am one, the pinnacle of the woman going crazy film, from the 70s, like Repulsion or Images. I dig that. It starts out so familiarly. This notion of you can't go home again is really, you shouldn't go home again. And why would you go home again? I don't think the impetus for her going back is necessarily that strong. And then it's just very confusing about what she's being told and why. And
what I was going to add to that was, beyond the sort of like chaotic nature of the film, which I think partially adds to her psychosis.
Sure.
So I can appreciate why those decisions were made to a degree. But the actual story, I think, is overwrought.
Yes.
Because it would have been creepy enough to have this character Regine, go back home, right? So that's a very common plot line. Like, oh, this character who has been home in a long time goes back home and learns the truth about something. And the truth is, this memory she has of her brother is wrong. Like, she killed him. That by itself would have been creepy and enough to work with. But this man coming back to tell her the quote-unquote truth, that just drove me crazy. Because ultimately, he's not telling the truth, and what he's saying, there's no basis to it.
And the Jefferson Hall is that actor playing Robert. They didn't tease enough that he fucked her mom. Basically, she's trying to bed him as well. Like there's enough creepy perversion there.
That's a good point.
It could have run on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So he's saying that I'm the father. So then it's like, oh, so you were fucking her mama while she was married to Udo Kier. Yeah, there's a lot to work with, because then they're seen at the little Hofbrauhaus situation, Oktoberfest thing. She was trying to get on him, it seemed. So yeah, those two things alone could have made a very intriguing story. Again, Regine, in the scenes where she's acting crazy, it was a little Strangers with Candy to me. When Regine meets her brother Isaac, that sort of, that's a big sort of chunk of the film, like 2/3 of the way, like halfway through. It's a lot, because it's very obvious that this is not real, perhaps. I knew right away, okay, well, she's imagining this.
Well, his accented little
and
boy
his voice. So he's obviously, if he's a figment of her imagination, he should sound like a kid, and he does. But that voice is, every time he spoke, I was giggling.
And the look of him reminded me of a cross between a creature you would get if you had Crispin Glover and Cloris Leachman matched.
Didn't Anthony Hopkins play the Elephant Man once?
John Hurt played the Elephant Man. Anthony Hopkins is in that film now.
Oh, so that version of the Elephant Man, I thought he looked like that.
Yeah, I think.
Speaking of random scenes, the guy who has the secret, what's his character actor
Isaac?
name? Yeah, no. The man
Robert.
who's Robert. There's a scene where he goes and finds a pile of money that Udo Kier has stashed then burns it.
Well,
what is the point of that?
The flashback he has gone to, because he's barred from seeing the mother, Rose, at the time that Isaac is supposedly born, and there's a flashback where he goes and offers that money to the grandmother, and she tosses it back at him.
Okay.
So something to do with that. Again, it's just so much stuff that is not properly grounding, that just is
Towards the end, Udo Kier, who hasn't visited his wife, who's in the insane asylum, he hasn't visited her in a long time, but he finally goes, because now everything's imploding on him with Regine. He's in the... It's almost like she's in a prison, and he's in the visiting area with her, and there's this 360 shot that goes on way too long.
Yeah, it's so unnecessary.
It's really
because it's not an intense enough scene to. There are several.
And then it culminates with the mom screaming no, and it's just okay, well, maybe you could have saved the shot for when she starts screaming.
Right.
But it's just for the entire 2 minutes, just going in circles.
And that actress, Sophie Mousel, is in old age makeup for most of her role, because she's obviously the same in the flashbacks. I do love Udo Kier, and he's a very busy man. But he's in The Painted Bird, which I think is going to be released soon, and it was in Bacurau earlier this year. He isn't without a few choice scenes in this. He has a freak out scene where he breaks all the utensils and plates.
I mean, he's a lot of when you hire Udo Kier, you're looking for an effect.
But there are two random scenes that just made me laugh. There's a scene where he's holding a ferret close to his face and saying, "I'm sorry." I don't know why.
Yeah.
I want to know why, but I don't. And then there's another scene where he's cutting up a steer or something, and
and he asks Regine.
Regine comes along, and looking at him, and she's wearing this beautiful green dress, and he's
you do it.
Here, you cut it up. She's no. And it reminded me of that scene.
And he gets mad and says, "You shouldn't have come here."
Yeah, well, then you should have come home. It reminds me of the scene in Straight Jacket with Joan Crawford, where she stumbles upon George Kennedy chopping up the chickens in the barn, and he hands her the axe, and she starts screaming. It was very much like that.
Another note I have is throughout the film, several people, there's one character, because there's a flashback to Regine where she works,
Which is in this kind of industrial plant.
Well, it almost looks like she's in prison.
Yeah. But
it has a cool look, like it's shot well, but it's like, is she in prison or at work? But there's a woman there who's like threatening her over like, you're trying to be with my man. And I should have counted how many times Regine is called a whore in this movie.
In her memories. In her memories,
and I just don't understand, like, we don't really get a sense that Regine was like this whorish woman.
I think that they were trying to tie together something about with her mother having a child with a lover and that's deformed. And I think that we're supposed to put all those pieces together, but they're so disjointed that it takes a lot more work to do that than this film makes it work.
My last note is, what does the title mean? What does Skinwalker mean?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I like it.
I did think about it, and I do like the title, but I don't... It should have been saved for a better movie.
And again, maybe that had something to do with more of what the child looks like. Is that you see the baby when it's born, and it looks kind of like that. It was Quato or whatever his name is in Total Recall on Marshall Bell's back.
Sure.
Like this deformed gray thing.
Or remember the glowworm babies from the 80s? Mm. You're probably too young.
I don't quite remember that.
I'll post a picture of the glowworm. The little baby looks like a glowworm. If it were gray.
Yeah, I don't. I feel like that sounds familiar, but I don't know.
That's all I have. What would you give this film?
Shout out to the DP Amandine Klee for the look. And
it's a beautiful film.
It's a beautiful film, and some of the editing choices are interesting. But 1.5 out of 5.
I would give it 1.5 out of 5 as well. All right, bye.
Bye.